Norway's image of being a peace-loving nation is, after my opinion, it is false. Not only is Norway among the world's largest exporters of military material, but Norway is also one of the countries in the world that most often participates in war outside its own territory. Norway and Denmark were among those countries that founded NATO in 1949. With regard to Norway, our country is deeply integrated in NATO's strategic concept and plays a vital role for both US and for NATO. With the new concept decided in Vilnius just a few days back, Norway's role in NATO will be even more important. Norway is intended to play a great role as a transit country for forces across the Atlantic, going to Finland and Sweden, but also to the Baltic countries. And we're talking about forces especially from US and Canada. The NATO concept of military mobility involves the rapid movement of heavy military material over large distances and across national borders. The EU finances projects on military mobility through PESCO in collusion with NATO. The plans are clear. NATO's new regional defense plans with requirements for member states, adaptation of command structures, strength building, and deployment of several operational units. Quoting, "For the first time since the Cold War, we are linking the plans for our joint defense with the plans for our forces, capacities, and the command system." This said the General Secretary Jens Stoltenberg on the press conference on the 16th of June. NATO has long led plans for increased militarization on the grounds of strengthening its collective defense. Now they must put in place more executive plans to integrate NATO plans with the member countries' plans. On the 12th of January this year, we could read in the Norwegian paper VG, Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre is open to considering stronger integration of the defense in Sweden, Finland and Norway under the NATO umbrella. And further on, the important thing for the Nordics in a joint membership in NATO is not to be the Nordics alone. It is to be an integrated part of NATO. Establishing of the US bases is the topic for today. On the third day of June 2022, the Parliament of Norway approved an agreement that gave the US the right to establish its own bases on Norwegian territory. Currently, 4 bases have been established. Provisions in the agreement prohibit the Norwegian authorities from checking whether US bases have nuclear weapons stored on their territory or whether vessels and aircraft have nuclear weapons on board. The Parliament ratified the agreement against a few votes. There was very little debate about the matter, something as serious as giving another country a right to rule over Norwegian territory. And I'm certain that this will increase the tension in the northern areas and put more pressure on the Arctic region. This is obvious. The agreement also gives the US the opportunity to store weapons that are banned in Norway, such as cluster munitions. It is American service needs that must be decisive for all activity in the bases. This will also apply to the storage and placement of nuclear weapons. So they will decide when it is needed, not the Norwegian government. The agreement applies for 10 years, but does not contain anything about terminating the agreement. And this was a important point for the International Commission of Jurists point that they pointed out in their consultation opinion. They also point out that there are examples of the US bases that it has with allies in connection with the transport and torture of prisoners. They have seen that. The Norwegian Defence Commission, which quite recently published their report on the future for the Norwegian military defence, wants more US bases in the coming years. So we must expect more US bases. An umbrella organization consisting of around 25 organizations started a campaign against the treaty, almost like the Danish one, and a lot of good work was done. Before the establishment of the US treaty, it was important to present it as a US project and not involve the NATO question, meaning if you were for NATO or against. But when we are continuing the work against the US bases, old and new ones, I do think that the link between the US bases, NATO, and their nuclear deterrence must be addressed. About the nuclear threat to the Nordic countries and the Arctic. At the NATO summit in June 14th, 2021, the line was expressed. NATO's nuclear deterrent posture is also dependent on US nuclear weapons forward deployed in Europe and the capabilities and infrastructure provided by the allies concerned. National contributions from dual-capable aircraft prepared for nuclear weapons to NATO's nuclear deterrence mission remain central to this effort. So they really link this strategy together. US nuclear weapons stored in Europe are a concrete expression of the US will and ability to defend Europe. Norway's support is clear to the NATO deterrence policy. This said the Norwegian foreign minister on January this year. So obviously he's for nuclear weapons in a way. Something called NATO's Nuclear Planning Group, NPG, reviews and facilitates the implementation of NATO's nuclear policy. It serves as the highest body on nuclear matters in NATO, and all NATO member states can participate in this committee. We hope that, and we have been working for, that Norway will follow France's example by refraining from participating. And this is also something that the peace movement in the Nordic countries could unite on to prevent the Nordic countries to join this group. In NATO's 360-degree approach lies a security plan with the launch of a new innovation accelerator and investment fund with technological investments. They have concrete plans for more collaboration between the private sector, the research environments, and the military. Private companies will become more important for national security in the future, writes the Norwegian Defence Commission, and reminds that in the West, commercial players in the defence market have increasingly taken over military development since the Cold War. It specifies to a small extent what this may entail beyond concluding the private companies must be drawn more closely into the total defence concept. A central point about today's politicization of NATO, and then also within the member states, is that the total defence should be used to mobilize wider groups and people in support of an aggressive military policy. We, the population, shall be familiar with the war preparations. And this is something completely different than to mobilize people in support of deposit of freedom, independence, and their own territory. I would also just mention a little bit about the cluster munitions, because it is a little bit interesting, because Norway has joined the convention, was very active in the Convention Against the Nuclear the cluster munitions. But this year, Norway has sent 11 launch units called M270 to Ukraine through Great Britain. And those launch units, they are built for cluster munitions. So we have asked the Foreign Department if they can assure us that Norwegian material will not be used to launch cluster ammunition or cluster munitions in Ukraine, but we haven't got any answer yet. And this is important also because when you are a member, when you have signed the convention, you're also obliged to work for that other parties do not use cluster munitions. And obviously, Norway is not doing that. I hope that we will be able to work against nuclear weapons to make a nuclear-free zone in the northern part of Norway, of the Nordic region, and also to stand up for democracy and the free speech, because I think that it is threatened.